to tell you, I'm very excited I could burst. I'm just so privileged to be here and to have your attention. And I was talking at the table earlier, we were just privy to a master's class, courtesy of Duke University in Constructual Law, so that was very gratifying. At the end of this talk, I hope to make this statement real, that the center of emotion is our center of gravity, which will tie into the mechanics of movement and will give us a special window into the animal mind. So I think there's three related questions we're dealing with today. Is what the heck does thermodynamics have to do with emotion, which I think Adrian addressed so ably and put that right into perspective. And then how can the constructal law open a window into the animal mind? And I mean open it wide open, so we can know exactly what's going on inside the animal mind. It's not guesswork. It's an adjunct of a principle of physics. It must be so. I hope I can carry that off. And then why the dog? You know, what's that got to do with dogs? And a little bit about my background is I grew up in the dog business. My dad was a world-famous dog trainer. And it's kind of interesting that Adrian's father was a very gifted veterinarian with a touch for animals. So I think as youngsters we got, my dad just had a feel for dogs. And I disagreed with his theory and technique here and there eventually, but he had a feel for a dog. He was a great bird dog trainer, and he just had a feel for dogs. He just had that cowboy wisdom that was very inspiring to me. And I always believed anything could be done because of the example he set in that way. So I grew up in this, when I was getting into theorizing about dogs at the time, behaviorism said there's nothing we can learn from dogs. They're polluted by domestication and living with humans. They're more of the human culture than they are of nature. And to understand the nature of an animal, you have to go into the jungle and study animals in the wild and exotic remote places. But I was working, my dad was a protection dog trainer from World War II. He was the first police dog trainer in the Northeast. We worked with biting dogs. We worked with problem dogs. One Doberman came in that killed a horse. So I was working, molding and shaping energy that was so wild, so primal, that a field biologist rarely saw in the wild and through binoculars at best. I was actually working with it, how to get a dog aggressive, how to get him to bite human flesh and yet not become rogue, still be a part of society, a civil part of society. So I think that gave me a special window into that, and what I discovered, because ultimately none of the theories made sense. The dominant theory, which my father was the first Cesar Millan of this country, he's actually in the National Geographic Book of Dogs. He put dogs in Macy's and school departments. He was a pioneer in many things. And when I started in the business, I had no questions. There were trophies on the wall, ribbons on the shelves, magazine articles from all over the country on his work. And we had the glitter eye and illumini of our time, actresses and actors and moguls coming to our place for training. So I had no questions. But every so often a dog did something that didn't make sense. Like our older shepherd Rommel would take any amount of abuse from our young infant puppies when we bred a litter. And when they were biting him too hard, at some point he'd roll around in ecstasy, and at some point just get up and run and take off, and just get away from them. He wouldn't discipline them like we were telling our customers to discipline the puppy that bites too much. And if a weak dog got a bone and the so-called alpha figure walked over to him, that weak dog would growl and bristle, his hackles go up. And that so-called alpha would just leave him, would give him the widest berth, whoa, what was I thinking, and get out of the harm's way. I said, well, what kind of captain would tolerate that from a private? And he asked to inspect his footlock, and the private says, oh yeah, you want a piece of this? And that guy's going to the brig. And then how come little dogs always dominated, quote unquote, dominated big dogs in any household? And then how come female dogs always dominate a male dog if they lived in a household with it? And then, of course, how come a cat always dominates any menagerie of dogs it lives with? So none of this made any sense to me. And then one day I had the breakthrough that what was really happening was emotion. That dogs live in the immediate moment. And, you know, when you come to understand behavior, we have an arbitrary choice to make. We can say that a complex behavior, or any behavior, is a function of intention. Now that's just a choice we make. Or we can say it's a function of attraction. These are arbitrary choices. So if we study modern behaviorism, we will see they've chosen intention. Even the word instinct carries intention of surviving, procuring resources. The species has a self-preservation impulse or genes. It's kind of in quotation. They want to replicate. I know biologists would say, no, we don't actually mean that. But they keep saying it, and eventually it does mean that. So we have these arbitrary choices. Is a behavior intention? Or we could take an opposite tack. Is it attraction? So since the 70s, I would say around 1977 or 8, I had this epiphany, if you will. It's emotion is immediate moment function of attraction. And I spent all the years intervening, following through on it. Well, what would that mean? It's just an experiment. How can I carry that farther? And by applying this skill of learning to see everything as a function of attraction, well, you edit out your thoughts. You can't put your thoughts into the head of the animal, like his little thought bubble over his head. And what that leaves you with is one thing and one thing only, energy. And I discovered that emotion was the physical embodiment of the principles of energy. And unbeknownst to me, I was learning principles primarily of thermodynamics. I'm a little bit nervous because usually I talk to people who know nothing about thermodynamics because I'm bringing it up in dog circles for the first time. So feel free to correct me, and hopefully I got this right. Finally, there's people in the audience that really understand thermodynamics, so I hope I got it right. Any errors are my own. So in 2012, I forget when design came out exactly, but a friend of mine, called me or emailed me and said, wow, you got to check out this book, Design in Nature. And usually when I get science books, if they're straight physics, like my Bible for behavior is called Conceptual Physics. And so it's just a gorgeous book that's got pictures and really vivid illustrations of electromagnetism and wave mechanics. And the language is beautiful. It's sheer poetry in some of the way the author wrote. So that's been my way of accessing physics, is through some of these easier treatments. So normally when I get a book that delves into the animal realm, like Constructive Law will do, when it gets to the animal part, I kind of like, oh, okay. But this book, it was like slaking a thirst. Every word in it made total sense, and I could square it up with something that I intuitively knew was true of the dog, or which had been verified to me through years and years of observing, and then doing some crazy things in dog training. Like a dog would come in that was a vicious biter, so I would encourage it to bite, and I would give it something to bite, and I would love it up for biting. All of a sudden the dog got social, and he started to love me up for loving him up for doing this thing, because I didn't read intention into his action. I knew he was attracted to me, but for some reason, which brings us back to thermodynamics, with a force that was more than he could restrain. And he couldn't turn it into an organized expression of force that came out in this hectic, turbulent fashion, that we then read in all these thoughts. Dominance, he's protective, he's possessive, he's jealous, he's this, he's that. But I realized there's principles of energy at work here. And it's interesting, if you go around the world and talk to people about emotional experience, in every culture, they'll describe emotional experience in energy terms. Oh, I felt all charged up, or that guy's wired. The chemistry between us was amazing. And as Adrian meant, I felt moved, and I felt a wave of emotion come over me. Juices are flowing. So we have these all around the world. Everyone speaks anecdotally in terms of energy. And as Adrian says, well, if 1 billion people say it, maybe it's science. It's not just anecdote. So I think intuitively we all recognize that we're actually acting like charged particles in the way we interact, and hopefully this presentation will make that vivid for you. So everything can be explained in terms of wave making. So Sang sent me the book, or sent me the link to the book, and I quickly bought it, and I had to communicate with Adrian. Now I send out, every time I see an intriguing scientific theory, I track down the email of the scientist and I send him something, and I get back, well, that's nice to hear from you, but we're too busy and don't bother me. And Adrian was so gracious to write me back, and we corresponded a bit, and then he submitted this, or he offered this quote that just sums it all up. So they move as one mass flow systems, not as particles in competitions, collisions. And to flow together must constantly link together like a moving carpet. And I was explaining in my principle of emotional conductivity, it all flows, it fuses dots into one flow system that can move freely, and that is good. And then the concept of emotional conductivity elaborates into all the high abstract things that we can do, communicative-wise. And if you notice, the words that we say convey force. You actually feel you've been acted on by a force. And that's because of the emotion that the word would root back into. So again, I believe this statement is true. All energies move as a wave. I did ask a physicist that once, and he said, yeah, that's true. There's an interesting story. Before they knew electromagnetism worked as a wave, they thought it was like a liquid, and it was like a pump, and the more power you put behind it, the better you could push the electricity. So they laid the transatlantic cable, 1890, with steamships. I remember what that took, from Ireland to Nova Scotia, and the Queen of England was going to communicate, I think it was Teddy Roosevelt or somebody, or Woodrow Wilson or somebody, and so the first transmission came through was perfect. Greetings from Queen Victoria, and then it started crackling. And the engineers, there were two engineers, one said, no, there's a wave that goes along with it. The other guy said, no, it's a liquid. So they kept increasing the power to push through the static, but it kept getting more staticky. And finally what happened is the whole pipe blew up, because the wave theory was right, and the wave traveling outside the pipe had energized the salt in the seawater, and created so much resistance, and the more power they blew themselves up. So it was after that, the wave theory of electromagnetism. It's hard for us to realize that there's a wave that goes outside those wires, and that's where the energy's moving. It's not in the wire. The wire is the guidance for the wave to get to where you want it to go, but it actually extends. So everything moves as a wave, but why wouldn't animals move as a wave? And one time Adrian pointed me, he said, turn to page 86 in Design in Nature, and that's where the locomotive rhythm was detailed, and bingo, there's the waveform. Now that finally gave me an interface with hard science, to take all this stuff I thought about emotion and interface it. And if that's true, then there's some very definitive things we can say about the animal mind, as we shall go on. So in order to move, you're always expressing an energy. It's a transfer of force. No matter what you're doing, you're transferring force. And I would say our words are just distillations of force. It's sort of like kids when they're mad, they say, oh, I wish you were dead. They don't even know what dead means, but they know it has a big impact. It moves, it projects a lot of force, so they love those kinds of graphic words. But the interaction between the two dogs, it's not a psychological interplay. They're actually perceiving as a transfer of force. Now every training system in the world believes in reinforcement theory. But mine's a little different. It's not the material consequence, the cookie or this or that. It's how much force and how well did the force move that determines the reinforcement value of any stimulus. So for example, a dog chases deer. Very few dogs ever catch a deer. Yet they get to run fast, well. So chasing deer has a high reinforcement. They may even get hit by cars. They'll never stop running deer because they moved a lot of force well. They got to run at full speed. They run faster and faster. And they never catch a deer, but they keep doing it. Here's a really good example of a dog moving a lot of force. That's about 20,000 pounds of sea blubber that that little dog pushed into the river. And he's feeling pretty good. He moved. Now, of what adaptive value is that? How many dogs get killed chasing cars, biting mailmen, UPS people? We put them down, and yet they keep doing it. Why so that brings us to why the dog. What is it about the dog? They're the most social, sexual, and aggressive animal on the face of the earth. In Elizabethan times, they used to do the pit bull thing. They would determine it takes 3 pit bulls to kill a bear. It took 4 pit bulls to kill a monkey. It was harder than any animal. But they actually did these experiments. So that just shows you how aggressive a dog is. And usually those things are seen as antithetical: social, sexual, which is why we neuter dogs to make them more social. That's why some people believe you should neuter them to make them more social. And aggressive. We see those 3 things as antithetical instead of complementary to the wave-making function of moving well. Okay, that's the rest of the YouTube expression of people moving a lot of force. So there's certain specific things we can say. Force always moves in a specific direction, from warm to cool. That would be the first principle of thermodynamics, correct?
The second.
Oh, sorry, second, right. Electric charge goes to ground. High water pressure goes to low water pressure. In the animal mind, the predator polarity goes to the prey polarity. Every animal has a predator projection of force. A bunny rabbit projects force. That's his predator makeup. And you'll see many funny YouTube videos of bunny rabbits chasing sheep all over the place. And so when any animal projects, a bunny rabbit famously attacked Jimmy Carter in a boat once. He had to club it off with a paddle. So everything has a predator aspect. If it has eyes, if it goes in a directed direction, that's predator energy. The projection of force is predator energy. If you ever want to test that, just try walking up to a wild animal. You're going to push them right away, because they perceive you as moving force at them. Meanwhile, that which can absorb force is prey energy, prey polarity. So in order for energy to move, it has to go from predator to prey. Which one is predator and which one is prey? Now we normally misinterpret that as one dominant, one submissive. But this one is acting more predator, and this one is acting more prey-like. And that's why they fit, because there's a transfer of force. There is no fighting in that scene, because they're perfect mirror images of each other. Look at their eyes, their ears, their bent of the body. Everything is perfect mirror image. And they will not fight, because one's absorbing force that the other one is projecting. And then if they're really well matched, they'll flip polarity. And then so it really should be likened to 2 kids on a seesaw. In this moment, one is up. In this moment, the other one's up. Well, the kid that's up is not trying to dominate the one that's down. What they're doing is moving well as a wave, and that brings you to a state of weightlessness, which is the universal definition of success in anything you do. If you love a piece of music, it's because it makes you feel weightless. And you go up and you go down and you fly all over the place following the music. And it's acting on a specific part of your body. that makes that happen. So this brings us to getting inside the mind of a dog, and you can challenge this notion, feel free. I would say that moving well is the optimal response in any given situation. So for example, moving well toward what you want is the best thing you can do in any possible situation, or moving well away from what you fear is the best possible thing you can do in any situation. So for example, if you're in a plane at 30,000 feet and you hit a lot of turbulence and you knew you could just run out the door and run down to land, it would take a lot of stress out of flying. You may end up in Topeka and have to take a bus to Portland, but what the heck. If you could always move well in any given situation, you feel safe. What makes plane travel difficult is you can't move when you're in that seat. And the only guy who's moving well is the pilot. So you notice after the plane crashed in the Hudson River, a lot of stewardesses took early retirement. Some of those passengers never flew again, but Sully's up there with 60 Minutes giving tours of the plane. Hey, this is what happened. Then I put it right there, I banked it, and bam, it was unbelievable. And he's having the time of his life reliving that experience because he moved great. He moved well. He was flying that plane right into the water. So he had the best emotional experience because he had mapped his locomotive rhythm onto the mechanics of the plane. That plane became an extension, literally, of his body. So when he was moving that, he had a feeling for the tail of the plane. He had a feeling for every part of that plane because he had projected something into the plane that we'll discuss when we get back to that. So anyhow, what Adrian has done is he's made all the waveform the central thing with the sports competition and evolution, and well, it must be the center of our emotional well-being as well. Moving well is the center of our is our goal. It makes us feel good. If you go to a fancy ball and you don't know how to dance the foxtrot or the waltz, you're in maximum stress. You got all the finery on, you got the most beautiful partner accompanying you, but you're apoplectic stress because you don't know how to move well. Or you could be there ragamuffin, but you can dance like Michael Jackson. You're going to own that dance floor. You're having the time of your life because you can move well in that context. So moving well is the key to well-being. And moving as a wave is the animal's metric of whether or not he is doing well. And because of the constructal law, we can say that every system in the body, physical or neurological, evolved to maintain or optimize a state of well-being. There's not one thing in the body that doesn't maintain or optimize a state of well-being. Therefore, everything in the body is subordinate to moving well. There's a very good TED talk by Cambridge professor Wolpert saying everything about the brain is about movement. It's a beautiful TED, W-O-L-P-E-R-T. It's a wonderful TED talk. It's all about movement. Everything in the brain is about movement. Language, everything is about movement. And it turns out our sense of time actually derives from our motor cortex dedicated to movement. That's where we get a sense of time. And Piaget discovered when children learn about time, they take distance and apply it. They said, well, when do you go back to school? Well, it's about from here to grandma's house. That's about how long I got vacation to go on. That's how they first start to internalize time as a function of distance, how long it would take to travel a certain distance. So animals move as a wave because, due to the constructal law, they've evolved a locomotive rhythm that moves the most amount of mass the farthest for the least expenditure of energy. It's a certain waveform. And that's why little dogs are yippy and barky, because they have the short little staccato wave. And the bigger breeds have a higher nervous threshold. Somebody says, what kind of dog should I get to live in a city? Well, get about 120, 80-pound Rottweiler, St. Bernard. He'll sleep all day. You just have to take him out for a few jaunts and he'll be good to go. But you get a little zippy dog, he needs a lot of vibration to get to satisfaction. So wave making is the essential of movement, and it must therefore be the architectural basis of the animal mind, making waves. This means that objects come into the mind in terms of how they relate to a waveform. We don't look at the world objectively. Everything is a function of how it perturbs our ability to move well. It's actually, I believe, how your brain organizes sensorium input into an actual shape, an actual object. Yeah, so this is a wonderful video. We'll just play a few seconds of it. Does this dog look like he's having the time of his life? Look at the joy in that dog. His mouth is slack, his shoulders are soft, he's projecting a full complement of force, and this second bound right there, that's what I call collecting. So what we're seeing is an emotional cycle where he's projecting force and collecting force perfectly evenly, which means his body is configured perfectly from stride to stride around one particular point, his center of gravity. If he isn't subliminally tracking his center of gravity vis-a-vis the external world, he's going to topple over, lose energy, he's not going to feel great. My theory is this gait of full extension is characterized by 2 points of suspension when he collects 4 legs and when he projects 4 legs. And that in the overall, the dog internalizes that emotionally as weightlessness, flying. What this leads us to an immediate moment state of attraction is deer love to be chased by wolves. Because that's the only time they get to fly. They can't run around when they don't know where the wolf is. But when the wolf chases them, they can fly, and they love it. They're actually attracted to the wolf. Thank you, Leo. Now, if your whole well-being is a function of wave making, why is that so adaptive? Because you could team up with another wave maker and wave couple. And that can beget free energy, where you get more energy returned to you than you put out. For example, in singing, there is no organ in our throat that produces harmony. But if you wave couple with another voice, you make harmony, which is the point. And there's no organ in your body making that particular, it's outside your body. It's part of a system logic, which is really what emotion is. It's a system that connects the two, the many into one through motion. Now here's a phenomenal example. We'll just play the first couple minutes so we can see this. Now this is explained as a function of high cognition, how the orcas hunt. But I think it speaks to something far more primordial. Something that every organism is doing at the most basic level of its mind, and that interfaces it with the ecosystem, and then interfaces all ecosystems into one world system, one flow system. So there's the seal that one of them can't make a wave big enough to wash it off. So the whole pattern of hunting like this is to generate, look at that, the big wave, and off he goes. So we'll spare the gory details. It was filmed from a cruise ship. I think he actually survived. But at any rate, now we can say there's adaptive value to those orcas teaming up because they get free food, free energy. But what's the adaptive value to starling murmuration? The biologists say, because they're always looking for material consequence where they're confusing the predator. But I guess that might be true with hawks. But we can find those same murmurations in schools of fish and sharks and whales and dolphins have learned to herd them into balls and then siphon off tens of thousands of them because of this tendency. So my theory is that what they're experiencing, and this is another insight to construct the law. I always thought of birds as suspended in air and fish floating freely in water. When I read Adrian's book, that fish has to pick up that whole pile of water to move forward, to part the water to go through. He's always encumbered by water. He's not floating freely if he wants to move. And likewise, the bird has to move the air to move to make a plane. So what are these birds getting out of those flocks? My theory is updraft. When they get 10,000 birds and they get all those wings beating, I think they create suction vortexes and they get wafted about, free energy. And there is no adaptive value per se, it's just the way the mind is worked. That's the way our mind works. There's no adaptive value to listening to beautiful music per se, but you feel free, you feel like you're flying, you feel weightless. A good conversation will leave you weightless. Everything boils down to that. Okay, Leah, no, that poor goat feels weightless. Yeah, so what's the adaptive value? I went to Alaska and you take the tour, and all of a sudden, the next thing you know, there's dolphins diving in your wakes. So here's a fast boat cruising through some sound, and all of a sudden, there you go. So what's he getting out of that? He's wave coupling. Look at the energy he's putting in to keeping up with a 30-mile-an-hour boat. What's he get out of that? Doesn't get any fish. So the biology metric that it's all about gene perpetuation, I don't buy it. I believe it's about network affiliation. In order to interface, to compose this one flow system, how did nature do it? Wave making, wave coupling. There's some better examples on YouTube. We'll have to dig one up, but it takes a while for this fox to get going. But there's a lot of YouTube examples of foxes in the wild getting in somebody's backyard and bouncing on a trampoline. Now notice how it triggers his mousing instincts, because that's exactly the free energy he gets when he projects into a mouse and gets to move. So what's interesting about that membrane is it's returning more feedback than he's putting into it, unlike the solid ground. He's getting free energy from bouncing on that membrane. And he really gets into it after a while. There you go. But notice it's triggering the instinct to mouse hunt, because that's the same wave making. He's making a wave. It indelibly harkens back to the memory of mousing. Thanks, Leah. So every behavior is derivative of wave making and wave coupling, and that leads us to the mirror effect. And I don't know who these two dogs are, but I know that they're probably not fighting, of course, it's a picture. But they're not going to fight, and the reason is they are perfectly mirroring each other. One is the peak of the wave, and this one is the trough of the wave. If we were to map them out, they'd be like that Bernese Mountain Dog. Moving, projecting force, collecting force. Now if an object comes to mind as a function of resistance to a wave, then this one is absorbing his stress, and therefore there's no fight. It's a mirror imaging. Now my theory is, how we can get into the mind of the animal, is the same way the animal would incorporate an object of resistance into his locomotive rhythm in order to go over uneven terrain or surmount an obstacle, is exactly the same mechanics by which he deals with animate objects of resistance. And again, many thanks to constructal law for showing the continuity between the evolution of inanimate and animate systems. Inanimate systems, they form the same hierarchical structure, but there's no gene perpetuation. There's no intention. And yet they're forming the same hierarchical structure as armies, as dog packs, as African wild hunting, lion prides. It's all the same thing. So I feel very confident making that statement for that reason, that as he incorporates an impediment to his movement into his movement by altering his gait, he is at an optimal state of well-being vis-a-vis that particular obstacle. And here we see the origin of the play bow, where the dog collects himself to gather force to overcome an obstacle, in this case a ravine. And that's the resistance he has to that's the resistance value, how far he's got to go to do it. And what he's doing is, we'll show a little bit, but what he's doing is he's absorbing all the energy in his hind end. He's lowering his front end for maximum spring in order to overcome an obstacle of resistance. Now if we look into, hopefully the play bow is the next slide. Yeah, sorry, now my drawing, I did not go to drawing school. So this is a notch or two below cave art. So that supposedly is a dog play bowing. And my theory is he's incorporating this projector dog, which could be a dog just standing there. This dog could be uptight. But a prosocial dog is absorbing him into his locomotive rhythm. He's mapping his body onto his body. And he says, okay, you're the peak, I'm the trough, in order for me to make a wave. That's how he knows how to do it. It's not cognitive. And what he's tracking is his own center of gravity, where force is gathered. So again, sorry about this, but all behaviors are wave-making, wave coupling. When a dog goes to the bathroom, he's actually coupling with a point on the ground. While he arches his back and selects a very specific spot. He may be guided by pheromones, but knows he has to move a lot. And the more unsure he is, the more he has to move. And what he's doing is unwinding a tape and then coupling with a specific spot, as if it's animate. I'm sorry, this is scent marking. They're taking turns lifting their legs on a pole, which is a wonderful example of wave making. One dog, they're synchronizing, which is my definition of turbulence, and aligning around a common line of attraction, object of attraction, which is my definition of laminar. And then humping, mounting, is not dominance. He's trying to couple with a point, the center of gravity of the other dog. Because if you ever watch a dog mount another dog, I mean, his eyes are glazed, he's not ornery in the least. And the other dog bristles at him, oh, sorry, he gets off. It's very, he's in a blissed out state. He has no dominant intention whatsoever. And the wave coupling and playing is a wonderful, play bowing and playing chase is a wonderful example of wave coupling. So a quick little argument, how sexuality, you may be surprised to know that biology has no theory for sexuality. You may be surprised to know that biology has no theory, the adaptive value of personality or aggression. It's very muddled. So I believe this principles of thermodynamics, specifically the constructal law, would lead me to wave making, wave coupling, is a much more coherent explanation for the evolution of. The real point of sexuality is sensuality, so that we can act magnetically towards each other. We act like electromagnetically charged particles of consciousness, and we know how to intuitively align so we can pack 20 people in a room and get along. Now it's interesting, behaviorism loves the bonobo. They call them the social ape. And every interaction is sexual, between mother, daughter, father, son, brother, sister. Everyone, they pleasure each other in every interaction, and they say to human beings, be more like the bonobo, less like the chimp. Don't be like the chimp. You put 10 chimps in a room, you got a bloodbath. But 100 bonobos, it's party time. But when it comes to the dog, it's the new Puritanism. Sexual bad, which speaks to dog as your mirror territory. All right. So the very body plan of a dog, of an animal, is to facilitate force transfers. So the back end of the body that absorbs force is the preyful end. And the front end, which projects force, most particularly the head, but most particularly the eyes, is the predatory aspect. In Burma, they were losing a lot of rubber workers. So they gave them masks with 2 eyes to wear on the back of their head, and then lose the tigers if they wore the mask. Once in a while, somebody would take one off to get in and out of the dugout. Boom, they'd lose a worker. So it couldn't go. It likes to strike from behind, but their eyes back there, It needed to go toward the preyful end of the victim, even though it's physically powerful to kill any human, no matter what end it goes at. But that's the way cats work. Now, you'll notice at the back of, if you look at the displays of prey animals, there's tremendous vulva displays, even on the males. And that's to attract the wolf, in my opinion, the predator. That's to attract the wolf. Now this next one is kind of long. Maybe we won't, I probably won't, is there any way to fast forward it to the, it's a beautiful treatment.
Yeah, you can choose where we.
How long does it go? Well, it's only 3 minutes.
3 minutes.
All right, let's play it. This is really brilliant.
Does it need sound? This one?
Herding, schooling. These patterns are everywhere in living systems, from the subcellular level to bacteria, insects, fish, and birds. What guides such collective behavior? Are there principles behind the ability of groups to move and sense? We tackle these questions with one of the simplest systems imaginable, a bristlebot made of a toothbrush head and the vibrating motor of a cell phone.
Here's your little Yorkie.
A bristlebot has no brain, no CPU, and no programming, making it a robust and unpredictable explorer. We design our bots to be elliptical, using a 3D printer and a battery that slides to adjust the center of mass. We ask,
That's an essential
what would
statement.
happen with dozens
Adjust the center of
when
mass.
they flock and swarm in coherent patterns? First, their locomotion. Each rotation of the motor, the nylon legs are flexed about 150 times per second, and when they recoil, the entire bristlebot is displaced a small amount forward. By controlling the inclination of the bristles, we can obtain two different types of individual bots. Spinners, which spin around their symmetry axis as they travel, and walkers, which move much slower along a straight or gentle.
So that would be laminar and turbulent.
Similarly to what happens with various species of social animals, when a small number of spinners are confined in space, they move randomly, and from time to time form aggregates that quickly disassemble. But when their number is increased above a certain critical value, our spinning robots self-organize into a large group that swirls coherently along the edge of the arena.
So they're all getting organized into a network.
When walkers take the stage, they quickly get stuck in traffic jams. Once again, this collective behavior occurs only when a critical population number is exceeded. In swarming, swirling, and stasis, our bristlebot's behavior appears remarkably similar to the collective motion of social organisms. What is the Turing test for physical behavior? Could one become convinced that under the hood of these creatures is more than plastic?
So what's interesting there is there's a circular boundedness to it. I propose the animal mind is bounded as that circle. What's also interesting is you need a certain number before you have social behavior, which suggests to me that social network comes first, the individual comes second. I do believe that's what constructo law suggests, that there's this fundamental overarching network and all the flow systems plug into it. And when those walkers pin up against the boundary, I think that's quorum sensing. And you push through that boundary and create a new orb within which you could get the turbulent part going. I think there's what, one more slide, a couple more. And now here's an example of when do dogs exhibit turbulent behavior. Now, here's why you don't buy a Malinois. Do not buy a Malinois. So when they shake the prey, we see them going side to side. But in reality, look what's actually he's doing. It's I call that rotomotive rhythm as opposed to locomotive rhythm, but it's the same thing. He's a spinner. So it's because he's suspended, you can see the actual body mechanics in graphic highlighted. You never see it otherwise. Yeah, do not buy it Malinois.
Are we good with
I
that?
don't care how good the movie is, don't get one. Now here's another, this is a great example of turbulence. He was built to roly-poly down the hill, right? He gets up, he does it all over again. And the reason is, that is an advanced form of absorbing obstacles of resistance into your locomotive rhythm. And integrating. So what we see in the dog, he's got the spinner, just like those bristle bots. He's got the spinner and the walker in him. And he can deploy depending on the object of resistance and mirror it and become social. So the social is built into these force transfers protocols, not into high cognition.
Oh, this is.
And this is interspecies communication based on transfer of force. Now because the dog is a predator, he can more easily absorb force. So he takes on the role of prey. That's why we can't look at, the deer has a predator aspect. That's the two fastest bone growing tissues in the animal kingdom are the horns of white-tailed deer and the teeth of canine puppies. They're equivalent organs, complementary organs. So here's the play bow. He's absorbing the force the deer is projecting on just by looking at him. Now, what you're looking at is the thrill of falling, just like the sprinter running. Collapse into sensations of falling. Makes it stimulating. And because the dog can absorb the energy of the deer is starting to feel the dog of his self. Therefore, the deer is starting to get bolder. But the deer doesn't have that rotomotive. See how the dog's shoulders are bending? Like the bulldog rolling down a hill. The dog has ability to absorb energy on every plane. And the dog is, you better watch out for those front feet. And the dog is getting the thrill of being chased. Because he's projected his center of gravity into that deer, when they make a wave, he feels weightless. That's what he's getting out of it. He feels weightless. The deer is starting to feel weightless. Okay, I showed him. So this is a universal behavioral that all species know. It's not specific to the genes of a certain species. I saw a spider stalking a fly, and there's actually a wolf spider that preys on musk ox larvae, and the musk ox larvae form a circle just like musk ox, and the wolf spiders attack like a pack of wolves. So it's an archetypal program, which brings us to why the dog. Is this the final one? This is a wonderful treatment. Everything's a wave. He goes through the whole history of science. It's all a wave. I think it's kind of long. No, only 3 minutes. The music's a little funky though.
Oh, yeah.
That's all right. All right, so we'll. All right.
Is that good? Should we?
That's good. So anyhow, my theory is that when an object comes to mind, I'll just use the dog, I think this is true for all organisms, they perceive it first and foremost as a force knocking them off balance. And the next thing they do is project their center of gravity into it, because they have to reacquire equilibrium. They're knocked off balance, and now this thing contains the point they have to couple with to get back to a feeling well-being. So this actually imposes an emotional strain on them. So the center of gravity, tracking that center of gravity, projecting it to a forward point, and trying to connect with it as a wave is the goal of all behavior. If it runs, maybe it's prey, you can eat it. But if it goes back and forth like the deer, maybe you can integrate with it, couple the wave, and now you can make more energy. So if you look at the history of the dog and the human, it used to be said that early humans selected for the nicest, sweetest puppy. And I never bought that theory because I was training dogs to sink their teeth into human flesh. And I mean, how did that survive domestication, that capacity? And then the latest theory is, which I'm gratified, it's almost uniformly accepted, is that hunting with early man is what domesticated the dog. Or the wolf domesticated itself into the dog because they had a common object of attraction, the prey. Humans were very good at killing big things, but they couldn't catch them, couldn't find them. Wolves are fast, just as fast as a mastodon, a woolly mammoth, but it's hard for them to kill it. So those two objects, those two organisms with a common object of resistance, they could connect and communicate with just like bokeh and the deer. It's built into the nature of the animal to evolve. So if we look at the flow pattern, the man and wolf could get more prey together, and then, well, why kill it? Why not just herd it? Then you could have nomadic tribes with their own built-in reindeer, with their own native, they could keep the prey right there. They could slaughter them whether they need them, or maybe they just harvest them for milk and then perpetual food, and they just migrated with the prey. And then that then begat agriculture in villages. So the latest theory is the dog domesticated the human into humans. Pat Shipman wrote a wonderful treatment of that. And they discovered 40,000 years ago, early hominids got really, really good at killing woolly mammoths. So they had whole villages built out of woolly mammoth bones. And they found proto-dog buried ceremoniously with a mastodon bone in its jaws. Obviously revering this animal was probably helping them in the hunt. And that could have been the defining thing where a physically inferior specimen such as early hominid outcompeted Neanderthal, who had a brain pan 1/3 bigger than early man, physically much more robust, but they couldn't domesticate the dog or couldn't interface with the wolf to produce the dog. That could be the defining feature. So what we have is improving the flow. Why chase the prey? Herd them. And then you don't even need prey. You can have agriculture, and you got the dog and the cat to keep the rats away and maintain the herd populations and guard the villages, et cetera, et cetera. So I believe that all this stuff fits very nicely into the constructal law. So when your dog is looking at you, if you want to know how his mind is structured, and we can go into it to great depth, but there's a part of his brain tracking his center of gravity, and he's projected what I call the emotional center of gravity into whatever he's attracted to. And then if he can get it to move simpatico with him, it is of his self, and he feels weightless vis-a-vis. That pit bull with the deer was feeling weightless. And that's what the payoff was. So anyhow, that's my application of thermodynamics to the animal minds, and why the dog. He is the basic code laid bare. It's not that he's the smartest animal, it's got nothing to do with it. He's the universal code. He's like, I call him social stem cells. He's the cell in your body that wherever you put it, becomes what it is, where you put it. It adapts to the medium. He's not the most complex animal. He's the simplest animal. But he can apply thermodynamics to this situation. If we bring a dog in here, he'll be a little unsure until he picks up high pressure, low pressure. He'll get that, and then everything will follow from that. And pretty soon he's like he owns the place. No other animal but the dog can do it. He can take the simple code, thermodynamics, and the laws of motion, and apply it to any situation. No other animal can do it. Because they're limited by instincts, and in the case of the ape, possibly by intellect. It's illegal to own an ape. Even though they're closest to us, he will kill you. But anybody, there's homeless people wandering around with the nicest dogs on earth. And they didn't go to puppy kindergarten class. Anybody can live with a dog because it's emotional rapport. You communicate on that primal level. Dog gets it, you get it. No, and to be honest with you, about 50 years ago, people got it a lot better than we get now. Now it's all high-tech, e-collars. We're blowing the poor dogs out of the water with all this interventionism. If we turned every dog loose, which happens a lot in certain European cities and out west, they all get along. I suppose there's some attrition due to car kills. But other than that, they all get along. There's no fighting. They just flow. They form their own flow system. And they just, how about the dogs in Moscow ride the subways and commute to work, rift off the people, and then they go back to the suburbs. It's just a beautiful thing. They totally so they look for trade. It's unbelievable. It's a good, look it up on YouTube. It's really amazing documentary. So anyhow, dogs are the basic code made the whole spectrum of their existence because of the evolution of the wolf as a group hunter. They all want something they can't get on their own. The cojoinment on humans and early wolves for that same reason. And domestication amplified it a millionfold. Because every breed of dog says something about hunting. Basset hounds, terriers, Cocker Spaniel means hunting woodcock. Dachshund means badger dog. It's all about hunting. The size of the dog's body plan reflects the prey he selected to hunt. And hunting is where, so my theory is different. A thermodynamic theory says hunting came first, social followed. As opposed to we created social, then we're able to hunt with them. No, it's the other way around. It's the other way around. So that's my treatment of constructal law vis-a-vis the animal minds.